The DEA is making big moves on marijuana. So back in election year 2022, if you remember, the Biden administration did two things during the midterms at once. They pardoned every nonviolent weed offender, but the more significant thing they did at that time was they asked the kind of federal bureaucracy to study whether or not marijuana belonged in Schedule 1. Now, Schedule 1 is the most restrictive category for an illegal drug. It means it has zero medical benefit and a high potential for abuse. You could say that the stronger weed lately has a significant potential for abuse, but the zero medical benefit has always been completely absurd. But it was clear at that moment that he was teeing up a 2024 move. Now, HHS and the FDA both signed off on reclassifying marijuana, moving it out of Schedule 1. The DEA has been dragging its feet, as you can imagine the DEA does. But yesterday, the Associated Press reported, and we can put this up, that the DEA finally is getting in line and recommending back to the White House that they do what everybody else said they ought to do, which is reschedule marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. Now, Schedule 3 says it has some medical value. So there's been some reporting that this would help with tax liabilities for marijuana firms, cannabis companies, because so basically but that's not necessarily the case because Schedule 3 is still quite restrictive. Because right now, if you are a marijuana business, you basically have it's basically impossible to write off a lot of your costs, which means you have exorbitant tax bill at the end because you don't pay taxes on your profits like a normal business. You pay taxes on all of your revenue because you can't write off your costs because your costs are illegal under federal law. At the same time, you don't have access to banking, which puts people at serious risk because they're moving cash around. Gigantic, trucks going back and forth filled with cash from homes to businesses. And so this is much less than what a lot of advocates would want, have wanted, but it will help on sentencing, with mandatory minimums. It also helps importantly with research. Right now, if you want to research marijuana, which so many people in the medical field want to do because there are significant medical benefits, like getting access, it's hilarious. Like if you want to get gummies or weed, you walk down the street and you buy them. Yeah. If you want to do research on cannabis at the university setting, it's impossible.
Right.
Like there are like a handful of studies that have gone through like 10 years of like fighting with the DEA.
So the researchers just
approval.
Go like getting dime bags on the corner and
they just research something else because they can't get the university to approve the studies, and so they just go study something else. So now at least this will lead to an explosion of actual research in the U.S. because around the world people are able to study it. So that'll help. This is still months away though.
Yeah.
It's got to go to the Office of Management Budget. There's a comment period, and this could drag out till after the election. Sagar's not here to complain, but Sagar can take pride in the fact that not much is going to change in the near term.
Yeah, I was going to say, and Sagar's arguments are serious, and I think a lot of our viewers probably, as much as we make fun of him, I think a lot of our viewers probably know this. But Ryan, if you duck to what you're right. You can see this Ryan Grimm book, This Is Your Country on Drugs, The Secret History of Getting High in America. If ever there were an expert on the history of getting high in America, buy This Is Your Country on Drugs by Ryan Grimm for the expert take.
It is pretty amazing. Like that book came out in 2009, and you could sort of, if you squinted, see the direction that things were going in the final chapter, but to get to this place in my lifetime is kind of interesting.
That's what I was actually going to ask you about, because I think that's a bit, like when we were talking about this a little bit yesterday, this is a really big deal.
I used to work, I was actually a weed lobbyist.
Right, that's right.
In 2004, I worked for the Marijuana Policy Project on state-level lobbying.
High-powered.
High-powered suit.
What's funny is the weed lobbyists now actually are high-powered. It's like John Boehner.
Yes, now they have John Boehner.
Right, but back then, and that's what's interesting about these schedule classifications, that right now, while this OMB process goes on, it's still classified Schedule 1 alongside like heroin, LSD, and yet you have people like John Boehner advocating for, what was he doing? Like, was it cannabis? Yeah, so the other thing I was interested in here is, if it's a Schedule 3 drug, you still have significant DEA regulations, but that means that 15,000 cannabis dispensaries in the U.S. that exist right now would have to register with the DEA. I'm reading from the Associated Press report here. That means they have to go along with these like fairly strict reporting requirements, and
which they're not going to do.
It sounds like the DEA is not even in a position to handle those reporting requirements. So in a sense, if this plays out even in the direction that's good for some of these dispensaries, is up in the air financially, because now they have this massive burden of reporting the DEA in ways that they weren't before.
It'll at least reduce the incentive for the DEA, I think, to break down the doors of cannabis dispensaries. But they've largely moved away from that and left it. They've basically started leaving it up to localities. In the beginning days, like in the Bush administration, when medical cannabis facilities first started opening, you'd have the DEA in standoffs with like local police who were supportive of the dispensaries. They've somewhat moved away from that. We have not yet gotten to a rational system, but it now gives Congress more ability to rationalize, I think, the system, because the DEA is sort of given a little bit of permission. Chuck Schumer is trying to put something related to cannabis into the FAA. He's trying to put weed banking into the FAA reauthorization. He keeps trying to do it because Schumer in particular sees weed and student debt as key ways to try to win the support of young people in particular.
So. And that's this complete unevenness culturally in terms of policy. That's really fascinating here. And for the other side of this argument, because I'm still kind of ambivalent, I do commend people to go watch some of Sagar's monologues on this topic, because I do think, Ryan, you mentioned this earlier, there is a level of potency that increased rapidly just in the last several decades. That's totally relevant to what's happening on underdeveloped brains when they're smoking weed. Like this is some serious research in that space that's worth paying attention to if you're a parent. Yeah,
and substance abuse is a problem. No matter what the substance, the question for me has always been: should it be criminalized? Is the answer to lock people up?
Yeah,
and I don't think so. But it doesn't mean we're ever going to get to a rational place either.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.
Help us build independent news and get the full show every morning at breakingpoints.com.